I just wanted to welcome you again. This is our last week in our teaching series called the Pentateuch. So this is the last time that I get to say this. The Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible. You guys have heard that so many times with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And what we've realized, though, is the stories and the themes that happen in these first 5 books of the Bible are extremely prominent and revealing to our stories today. So this is the last week in the book of Pentateuch. We did it, right? Like, woo, we get a little celebration there. But we are in Deuteronomy looking at God's mission, this mission that God has for his creation. This past couple weeks have been a little bit, honestly, comical. Anyone on Twitter? Twitter's not the main one. Not very. I got one over here. Well, all right. Twitter. No one's on the Twitter game. But it seems like at this moment is a very great commentary on our culture, especially surrounding the Notre Dame fires. Because what's happening is nobody's really happy with what's going on. So Twitter has been raging. There's been everything from grieving the loss of some beautiful art and parts of a historic and ancient building to people who are angry that they raised so much money so fast. I even saw a tweet that some guy was angry that they would have to use wood to rebuild it because they're trying to figure out there's got to be a better sustainable way to do it. I mean, it's just nobody's happy. But I think if anything, this image is kind of burned in our kind of like modern psyche the past month or so. This horrific fire that happened. Has anyone ever visited Notre Dame before? We got some good ones. All right, there we go. I have unfortunately had not seen it in its former glory, but it's such a beautiful piece of history. And they raised $1 billion in a couple of days to restore this building that was on fire. But some crazy numbers, though. They started construction 850 years ago. It took about 200 years to build. And so since everyone's angry about Notre Dame and everyone's giving their own descriptions of what's happening, I thought I'd throw my own voice in the middle. And I want to say this, and I want you to you're going to let me explain it regardless because I have the mic. I have the mic, right? But I want to be a little bit provocative this morning, and I want to say this: let it burn. Just let it sit for a second. You feel that tension? Let it burn. If anything, this steeple, this cathedral has become almost this cultural symbol. This place that's supposed to display the beauty of God within France's culture that has completely moved away from God. I mean, France is what we would call a post-Christian culture. It's moved beyond religion. It says naturalism is the right answer for the world, right? We're evolving and becoming better human beings, and we find meaning in our work, and we find value in anything that we create. But what's happening in this moment is this beautiful cathedral is burning, and it's this beautiful example or picture of what's actually happening to the Christian faith in our world, in our modern world. Everyone was startled about losing art. And I have to say this, it is terrible that we lose beautiful artifacts and pieces of history that describe where we came from. And so the art that was burned in the fire, we can grieve that. But if anything, what we have to say is, what did that cathedral actually stand for? Because at this point, everyone's angry that a piece of an artifact of history was burned, but have they actually realized what the purpose of that building was for? I have 2 things I wanted to point out before we jump into Deuteronomy about this cathedral in Notre Dame in Paris. The first is this: the cathedral was supposed to be the Liber Pauperum. And it's a Latin phrase for a poor people's book, or a poor person's Bible. So if you've ever seen pictures and you walk into this beautiful cathedral, the stained glass windows all throughout, just this like glorious picture of the light coming in, all of that was to tell a story. Right? And so all of the sculptures and the stained glass and all the art on the walls was telling the story of God and how he revealed himself to creation. It's so like if you couldn't read, if you didn't own a Bible, you could just walk in and see the story of God on the walls. And I don't think that's what frankly, I don't think that's what our modern world looks at this cathedral for anymore. They don't care about the story of God. They're just enthralled with the beauty of the art itself. And the second thing is this: the cathedral it was called Point Zero. There's this plaque, I have a picture of it. There's this plaque on the floor at the cathedral, and which indicated all of the distances from Paris. So what it meant, if you were a mile from Paris, that meant you were a mile from the cathedral. Right? This was the center of the city. This was the heart, the core component of the city that they measured all other distances from this point, this cathedral. What's crazy to think about, though, is the imagery this creates. That at the center of a city was this beautiful cathedral that spelled out the story of God for its people. And everything else was measured from this core point, where God was this picture of God dwelling with his people. Or this beautiful picture of God wanting to redeem his creation, and this building was a representation of it. And so, if anything, this cathedral has become this nostalgic symbol, but where is the mission to the world in this? This cathedral spells out the story of God to all its people, but is it really effective anymore? And the real question for us in this moment is, how do we then reclaim mission? How do we keep from becoming the old, beautiful cathedral that people just visit because it's beautiful? And how do we reclaim the beauty of the truth that's found in Jesus, that Jesus brings life, not just beauty, not just art, not just creativity, but life and life to the full? How do we recapture that mission, especially as we move on from celebrating last week the risen Lord? How do we embody that in our modern world? I think at one point that cathedral beautifully displayed what Matthew 5 says is the city on the hill, that light that captures the world because of its truth in Jesus. And now it just has become this beautiful artifact left in time and burning. So why don't we jump into Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1. If you have a Bible, why don't you turn with me? And I would love for us to see God's mission to his people and what that means for us as followers of him. This is a moment in Israel's history where Moses is teaching them. He's reminding them of all the commands that God had given them at Sinai. So if you remember the tablets, the 10 Commandments, that's what we call the Mosaic covenant. Moses is reminding all of his people of all of these commands and what God has done on their behalf. And so we're going to jump in at verse 1. Now, Israel, hear the decrees and laws I'm about to teach you. Follow them so that you may live and may go in and take possession of the land the Lord God of your ancestors is giving you. Do not add to what I commanded you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commands of the Lord your God that I give you. You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did at Baal Peor. The Lord your God destroyed from among you everyone who followed the Baal of Peor. But all of you who held fast to the Lord your God are still alive today. See, I have taught you decrees and laws as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land you are entering to take possession of it. And so again, Moses is reminding him, hey, these are all the laws that God has given us. He goes in the next chapter to, again, just outline all of the 10 Commandments and says, look, God has revealed himself to you. He's giving you this law and this decree, this way of life to follow. And he's just reminding him of all of these things that have already been said in the previous other books. But what I love in this moment, in this first section of chapter 4, is this cadence from Moses. We get this idea, Israel, hear the decrees and the laws. And then he says, follow them so that you may live. And then finally in verse 2, he says, in verse 1, he says, keep everything that I'm giving you. Don't add or subtract to it. And I think, if anything, it gives us kind of a structure around what it means to be obedient. So Moses is calling him, look, these are all the laws. Obey them. But he goes deeper and gives us hear, follow, keep. And I think each one of these, if we pull out some of the context, is some real great truth for us and how we're supposed to obey God today. And the first is this, to hear. I love how Moses starts with this, hear the decrees and laws I'm about to teach you. Because there's a posture in hearing. There's a humility that has to do with being able to be teachable. Like if you're in a classroom, in a classroom setting with a teacher, and you just kind of do one of these, right? You're not going to learn anything, right? There's a posture that you have to take in humility to hear the commands. And what it tells us is there's something to learn. I think as human beings, we hate admitting that we don't know everything. There's something to learn in this process. Moses is saying, hey, look, you're doing okay. You're still alive. You're still following God, but there's something else to learn. There's a further process that needs to take place. And so Moses begins this whole teaching to Israel with this, hear. Set yourself in a posture of humility so that God can teach you, so that you can learn his commands and his decrees. The second thing he says is to follow. This is where I think a majority of us can fall off the train, because following takes discipline. And discipline is, can we just say it, it's hard. is so hard to be disciplined in normal life, even if it's like healthy eating or going to bed on time or not indulging into certain behaviors for too long because you just get sucked into it, right? We know discipline is very hard. But there is such a blessing in this obedience as Moses calls them to follow. You notice he says, follow them so that you may live and may go and take possession of the land. He's saying, look, if you just follow these precepts, these commands that God's calling you to do, you will live, you'll have life. That's a good thing, right? You'll live, and not only that, but there's a blessing and a promise over you that there's a place for you to dwell in safety and in the presence of God. Listen to these commands and then follow them. Do them as this active part of what it means to follow and obey God. We have to change our behavior in order to follow properly. And the last thing he says is to keep. Hear, follow, keep. And I love how he adds in the last part, don't add or subtract to God's commands. And there's this almost like echo back to the garden with Eve. I don't know if you remember in Genesis when the serpent comes to Eve and says, look, did God really tell you not to eat it? She goes, well, yeah, God said not to eat it, but he also said not to touch it, right? She's adding to God's commands. And what happens when we add or subtract from God's commands, it often comes in line with our own agendas, and we don't actually pursue God's commands or laws. So he's saying, look, keep it. And what keeping means is don't change it. God's revealed this way of life to you. Don't change it. But what we also learn is that in keeping, there's transformation. Right? There's this hope that habits and behaviors and this idea of keeping God's commands turns into affection and shapes our hearts. It's not just an action that we participate in, but it comes from an affection and a change. But there is a new way of living. We're not just following rules, but we're being transformed into the image of Jesus. So Moses gives this declaration to these people, look, listen, be humble. There's something here for you to learn from. And follow, change your behavior, change your habits. But then there's a deeper implication that God's going to come and transform you when you obey, when you show and reveal your obedience to his way, that your hearts will be shaped and your affections will be changed. Because ultimately what God was saying is there is a way to life. There's a way to this promised land where the milk and honey is flowing, right? That would still be good imagery if there's like this lazy river and just honey falling from the trees or whatever it was. Like, it'd be beautiful. There's a place for comfort, for you to belong, for you to know God deeply. But on the other hand, there is also a way of destruction. I don't know if you see this in verse 3. We get this description. You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did at Baal Peor. The Lord your God destroyed from among you everyone who had followed the Baal of Peor. But all of you who have held fast to the Lord your God are still alive today. See, there is a way leading to death. So Baal Peor was this rival god in Moab. And some of them the Bible describes as they yoked themselves to this god. And Moses is claiming that God destroyed them. And these moments of violence from God are always really difficult to hear and understand. I would say there's definitely some mystery around how God's intervening in human history. But what we do learn in this moment is that there are choices we make that lead to death. There are high stakes at play in our decisions of obedience and disobedience. Like your life and the decisions you make have soul impact. And whether you know it or not, the decisions you make on a daily basis are forming you and your soul. Whether you're deciding to obey God's laws and his commands and to follow in the way of Jesus, or if you're deciding to disobey and do your own thing, it's shaping you for something. You're becoming a person more and more every day. And the question is, are you being obedient to these laws? Are you being obedient to these commands that God has given you? What I love in the next couple chapters is having kids is really fun because they come up with questions that you would have never thought to ask yourself. It's like that kids say the darndest thing type of idea. But in the next couple of chapters, there's this hypothetical conversation that Moses has with a child. And the child asks, hey, why should we keep these commands? I think that's a brilliant question. Like when you read the Bible and you see these laws, when you go to the New Testament and you read the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says to love your enemies, to pray for them, when Jesus says to follow him with all your, like take up your cross and follow him, right? This beautiful imagery that comes in Jesus' teaching all throughout the New Testament. Why should we do it? Like why should you follow? Why should you walk out the door and say, you know what, today I'm not going to kill anyone, right? Like, is it just the consequences of prison and jail? Like, I couldn't stay in a jail cell for too long and go crazy, so I'm not going to kill anyone. Like, that can't be the mentality, right? That can't be. Like, are you going to walk out the door and say, I'm not going to steal anything today just because that's what the law says? Or I'm not going to lie to anyone because that's what God wants me to be honest and truthful. Why do you follow these commands? The description we get, or the answer we get from Moses, is beautiful, and I want you to hear this. In the future, when your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, laws the Lord or God has commanded you, tell him, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. There's a beautiful description of God's intercession in their life. They've experienced the goodness of God firsthand. So they're not obeying the law because that's what the law says, but they're obeying out of an affection of the heart. I mean, this is a crazy moment. Why do they follow the laws? Because they love God and he's revealed himself to them. And the same question is there for us. Why do you follow the rules in the Bible? Why are you pursuing Jesus and becoming more like him? Why are you following and practicing the way? It's because there should be an affection at the core of your center where you know that God brings the best way of life and these rules are a part of it. I think a great way to think about this, though, is in friendships and in marriage. I'll start with marriage because that's where I'm at right now. Some of you who are not married, we'll get back to you. Give me a second. So my daughter, Ellie's 2.5 now, she grows up, and maybe in a couple years, she asks me, Dad, why did you marry mom just to do the dishes? You know what I mean? Like, why did you marry mom so that you could just mop the floor or pick up Lois's poop outside of a Great Dane? That's a task, I'll tell you. Why did you marry mom just so that you could serve her? I mean, there's a question in it that's very poignant, right? And even deeper, maybe even if when she gets older and she realizes what marriage symbolizes, why did you marry mom so that you would only love one person that way? That you'd only pursue someone like that intimately, just one person? Why would you do that? Why would you marry someone so you could just sleep with one person for the rest of your life? Or share the same room? Like, why would you marry someone for that? And I hope at the heart of our marriages and this covenant love that we have for one another is an affection. Like, I serve my wife in this way, not because that's what my vows said on the marriage day, but it's because I love her, right? Deeply, intimately. There's an affection at the heart that changes the way I live because I've entered into this covenant relationship with her that says, look, you're it. I'm going to pursue you until I'm dead or you're dead. It's either way. We're going to do this together. That sounded really bad, but it's supposed to be romantic. Like, that was supposed to be romantic. Jeez. Pray for my wife. That's not romantic at all. My goodness. That's peculiar. But that's, right? But at the heart of the marriage relationship is that affection and love. And for those of you who aren't married, I hope there's that person in your life that you've determined is like your best friend, someone to journey with. Right? But we have to put up with a bunch of stuff that we do because we're sinners, right? We're not perfect, and so we hurt each other. We stab each other's back. We say things that aren't kind. Why do you put up with those things? Because you value that person. You said, look, I'm going to commit to you because this life is about living in community, in friendship, in that covenant idea. And so we know this in our marriage and our friendships. We're not following a set of laws or ethics. We're not following a set of vows or assumed roles in friendship, but we are deeply moved by the affections of our heart to serve one another. That's where it comes from. And that's what I think is happening in this moment with Moses and Israel. Moses is asking them, look, hear, follow, keep. Why? Because God is good and you love him. And he's revealed himself in a powerful way. And that's where mission starts. I think it's kind of, you maybe thought that's kind of peculiar. Lance, you're talking about mission in this burning cathedral. What does that have to do with these first few verses? But this is where mission starts. It begins with a people who have experienced the heart of God. They're hearing, they're following. The language we like to use here at Community is practicing the way. We're in it, we're listening, we're hearing, we're keeping these laws that God has given us and this way of life that he's called us to. But it's impossible to do for a heart that's discontent from God. It's impossible for someone to do that who's disconnected from God because there's no experience of love. I love what James Smith says. He says, you need to curate your heart. You need to worship well because you are what you love and you worship what you love. And you might not love what you think, which raises an important question. What do you want? What do you love? Is it God and his way? I mean, this moment is kind of this reflective time to just be like, what do I love? Because ultimately, your heart drives your behavior. Your heart drives you to action. in the same way that it does in marriage and friendship, in the same way it does in your relationship with God. Who do you love? What do you want? I think, if anything, what I love to see in the Old Testament is God's grace over his people, his patience with his people. And he talks about Baal, Peor, and the people who had started to worship another god. And I love this line. I know it sounds kind of crazy at this moment, but verse 4 says, "But all of you who held fast to the Lord your God are still alive." Right? That's kind of a good claim, kind of something to celebrate. We're like, woohoo, we made it this far. But what I see in this moment is God is still creating a way for his people to be in relationship to him. And not only that, he's creating a people that would then go and do his mission. So what we see is God's mission is to save his people and to heal the world. Or we see creation was beautiful and it was good. It says it all throughout the creation story. It was good, it was good. And when humans were created, it was very good. And there's this beautiful moment when everything is in harmony. Lions are playing with lambs. The serpent is playing with the child. There's no war or violence. And humanity is in the absolute core locus presence of God. But then rebellion enters in and there's a fall and everything is destroyed and God's intention for creation is marred. And so what we see right after Adam and Eve leave the garden is God starts his mission. And he says, I'm going to bring these people back to me. I'm going to redeem them with this religious language. And so God is designing, he's desiring to transform this people with this law and this command. And he's chosen Israel to do it. And they've swayed back and forth. They've faltered. They've sinned. They've disobeyed. But in this moment, you're still alive today. You see, God doesn't change his plan. I would have changed my plan if I had a group of people and said, okay, we're going to have a group project. We're going to build a house. And if I came back the next day and like everything was on fire and people were arguing and like punching each other, I'd be like, okay, let's start over. I'm going to do a different plan, okay? You're all fired. Go on. Get out of here. But God, in his patience and his grace, says, I'm not changing my plan. My plan is still to use you to reveal the grace and blessing to this world. But why does he do that? Why is he patient with a people who oftentimes leave, who are fighting, who destroy his plans, who are always in it for themselves and their own agenda? Why does he do it? Let's pick it up in verse 6. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations. Moses, let's back up. Moses is talking about these decrees and these commands. He's saying, look, follow them. And why? Because he's saying, observe these commands, observe them carefully. For this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear about all these decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Listen to that. Wise and understanding. What other nation is so great as to have their gods near them the way the Lord our God is near us whenever we pray to him? And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I'm sending before you today? Only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. Why had God chosen this people? Ultimately, God was shaping his people to be on mission in the world, to reveal his goodness, to reveal this third way of living, to reveal this blessing to everyone. What we call this is this contrast community, this separate people, this distinct and unique people, maybe even peculiar and weird to a world that doesn't know who Jesus is. But this is God's plan all along, that Israel would be this people driven towards the world. They would be blessed to be a blessing to everyone else. I love this language used, though, wise. Confidence, because I think wise is this beautiful thing. It's kind of why I grew a beard, so just to give you the idea that I'm wise, because anyone who has a beard just has to be a little bit wise, right? That's just how it goes. You can argue with me after, it's fine. That's just how it is. But this wisdom, I think, reveals a couple things. It reveals confidence and direction. When there's somebody wise in your life, you just know that they know what's going on, right? They have this direction. They have this confidence in the way they're living. It's something just like, so I want to attain that type of wisdom and lifestyle. They know what truth is, and they're able to apply it to their life. We're in like an Avengers rage right now because the last movie just came out. If there's anyone wise in the Avengers, I think it's Doctor Strange. You with me? You agree with me? Doctor Strange. If you saw the last movie, and I don't, spoiler alert, Thanos is trying to rule the world. He's trying to snap his finger. There's stones involved. Go watch the movie. It's fine. You'll figure it out. But at this moment, Doctor Strange, before he disappears into the abyss, he says the line this is how it has to be. And I think that is such an example of wisdom. He knows what's going on around him. There's this understanding and there's this confidence in the direction he's going. So there's the wisdom, and that's the type of wisdom that God's applying to Israel. The world will look at you and say that you are wise, you're confident, there's a direction about you. The second thing is understanding. And understanding is this deep thing. I don't think it's just knowing. It's not just this head knowledge, but it's this knowledge and comprehension. Right? If there are characters in our movie world that I think are understanding, I think of Gandalf and Dumbledore, just because the wizards, they just seem like they have some type of understanding that I don't have. And they all have beards, so there you go. Wise and understanding. But what I think of understanding is the ability to see the whole field, to see both sides and to be a little bit detached from the story and understanding what's really happening in front of you. And I love this idea because Moses is saying, look, if you follow these commands, everyone around you will say that you are wise and understanding. That will be your character traits. That will be who you are to the world. You will be bragged upon by other nations. They will be dazzled with what they see and how you live in this existence. This reminds me of Jesus in the New Testament. After he healed, there's this story of Jesus in this house, and there's these friends who burrow into the roof and lower their paralyzed friend down on a mat. And after Jesus heals him, the whole crowd says this: "We've never seen anything like this." And I think that's capturing this idea of God's mission to the world, that he's creating a people that dazzles the world, not because we're can do some cool dances and are really hip and have skinny jeans, but there's something going on at a deeper level, this wisdom and understanding that people desire to have. That is what his people are supposed to be. But Israel didn't understand this missional purpose. They were called to be this alternative community, this contrast community. But all throughout the Old Testament, we see this theme within Israel, their desire to be like the world. And you see how opposite that desire is. God's look, I'm calling you out to be different. I'm calling you out to reveal my character, my presence, my wisdom. And all the while, Israel's look, this is too hard. We just want to be like them. We want to be like the other communities in 1 Samuel when they want a king. So look, give us a king so we can just be like every other nation. They don't get it. They were called out to order their public practices differently. In a medical term, Israel was called to be like this antibody to the world, devouring evil and darkness, devouring all the things that bring sickness to the body or disease. They're called to be this radical, unique, and peculiar people. And Moses, as he speaks to the people, he wants them to realize that they've not only given the privilege of receiving God's presence and his blessing, but he also declares their missionary function. They would be blessed by God's presence in order to be a blessing to everyone else. And God would demonstrate his goodness through his people, that they would serve as agents of blessing worldwide. This was God's mission, to change a people, to display his goodness and his kingdom. I have a question for you. Have you ever thought of your obedience in that way? Have you ever perceived your obedience to the way of God as a mission? As functioning as a revelation of God's presence to other people around you? When you say no to sinful behavior, do you think it's just following a law, or do you actually really believe that it's revealing the way of Jesus to people around you? That's a radical way to view obedience. God is shaping you, not just for yourself, but for the world. God has redeemed you with the good news and with a new way of living that will bless people when they enter into that way as well. As you follow Jesus, as you hear, as you practice, as you keep, you are partaking in the mission God has called you to be this peculiar, unique people in this moment. As Paul would say in 2 Corinthians, you show that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of the human hearts. What Paul's doing is he's taking this Old Testament idea that, yes, they're following the way, this law ascribed on these stone tablets, but now in Jesus, your hearts have been transformed to do the very same thing, to serve as letters, to serve as symbols, to serve as icons of what Jesus has done in your own life and what God has desired to do with all of creation. In verse 7 and 8, we get these like random rhetorical questions that I wanted to point out for a second. In verse 7, what other nations is so great as to have their gods near them the way the Lord our God is near us whenever we pray to him? This rhetorical question is like, what other nation has a God who's so present? I mean, we've been all throughout the Old Testament, the past 5 books, we know that God's presence is with his people, right? The pillar of smoke, the fire, the splitting of the sea. When the tabernacle is blessed, God's presence falls on it, and Moses is unable to go in. There's like these crazy physical representations of God's presence. He's with his people. The second question in verse 8, and what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws at this body of laws I'm setting before you today? What other nation has such righteous and just laws? I mean, if you read throughout the Old Testament, there's these laws that assume a community of neighborly economics and political practices. There's so many just social practices within Israel that wasn't anywhere else. If you were a widow, you were cared for. If you were an orphan or a child, you were cared for. If you were an alien from another country in Israel, guess what? You got to Sabbath and rest. You weren't going to be taken advantage of. I mean, these beautiful practices set within Israel that set them apart. They weren't to take advantage of people, but they were to love and be patient and reveal the way of God. These 2 prominent themes are here: the nearness of God and his justice that he brings for all people, not just Israel. The book of Deuteronomy is holding together these 2 ideas, that there's a holy presence and there's a social practice. For either alone is inadequate and will not grasp the attention of the other nations. Because think about this, if God is here and there is no justice, then he has no power. Like if God is just present with us and there's evil running rampant, if the heart can never be transformed and brought to healing, then God is not powerful. But if there is justice and God isn't here, he's just far off, then there is no love. Because does God really care about his people if he's not present with them? But the beauty that we get to proclaim in this moment is that God is both. God is near to you, and he's also just, bringing hope and healing in his way. But we feel this tension today in the way we've pursued mission and evangelism. God has brought this transformative way from Jesus to heal you from your sin and to make you as representatives, as agents of freedom in the world around you, on your streets, in your city, at your workplace, wherever it is. If you're a barista or an accountant, if you're a realtor or a delivery guy, it doesn't matter. If you're a stay-at-home mom, or if you're a sales clerk or a cook, those are all places where you get to reveal the mission of God. That's what God does. He transforms his people to bring healing to the world. But there's this massive disconnect, I think, in our modern ways of doing evangelism and mission. So much so that when I say the word evangelism, some of you get a little bit scared, right? You start shaking in your chair. You're like, whoa, no, we're not going here. Because evangelism is scary. It's a little bit scary. You have to talk to people. As an introvert, that's scary. I'll be honest with you. I don't seem like an introvert. I've practiced. But it's scary to think about. But there's this research that was going on with Barna, and I want to just share this real quick before we close. I wanted to show the first slide. It shows, I want to see this. I wanted to show you this because I think, if anything, it's just important to see that every generation understands that part of being Christian, part of following Jesus, has a component of witness and mission. Right? If you're following Jesus, then part of your walk with Jesus is revealing that truth to other people. This is Great Commission. This is go and make disciples. This is, as a Father has sent me, so am I sending you, as Jesus talks to his disciples in John 20. There's a powerful component of mission involved in what it means to follow Jesus. The other thing is that every generation agrees that the best thing that could ever happen to someone is for them to come to know Jesus. That is a powerful statement, and that's something we all agree on, and I think that's something really encouraging. Why? Because Jesus' way brings life. And we can all agree that the truth of Jesus sets people free. Like shackles come off in behavior and desires, where we're able to enter into the goodness of God. Like as Israel was promised this land of comfort and peace, this land of presence, we've been given this opportunity to enter into that kingdom, to find healing. And this, so it's so encouraging to know every generation agrees that there is some missional component and that there is a goodness, a deep reality that Jesus brings hope and healing. But the second slide, it starts to trouble us, right? Especially when it gets down into these ideas of judgment and sharing. So much so that some people believe it's wrong to share one's personal beliefs with someone of a different faith in hopes that they would believe in Jesus someday. And on a deeper level, I think this is the heart of the problem, that today our modern culture thinks if you disagree, you're judging me. And we hear that all the time. There's no space for confrontation. There's no space for conversation, because ultimately, my truth is my truth and leave me alone, right? There's this kind of fortifying culture that's going on around. And so I wanted to show you this to reveal this one point, that there's a lot of tension within the church at this moment on what it means to be a faithful witness of Jesus. Evangelism, mission, all the things that are important and are core components of being a follower of Jesus, yet we're missing out on how to do it. We don't have a plan. We're confused. We're discontent on what it means to follow Jesus. And there's really three responses that we have. One, we assimilate. We say, look, yes, disagreeing with people is judgment, and so I'm not going to reveal the truth of Jesus, and I'm just going to become like them. And I hope you hear the tension in that, because ultimately that's what Israel did. Look, we don't want the tension. We don't want the conflict. We get, Lord, that you're good, but we don't want to have to reveal it to everyone. Just give us a king so we could be like everyone else. Our first response is usually assimilation. I think in our younger generations, that's our first response. But the other two are fortification. What it means is like the culture is against me, and so I'm going to wall up in my home. I'm going to seclude myself from the rest of culture and not reveal Jesus. And the last way is domineering. I'm going to go into culture and overpower everyone and become superior so that everyone has to follow my way. I would have to say all three of those things are not proper responses if we're looking at mission and Jesus. There has to be a third way. And this way, from religious terms, is this idea of incarnation. And what Jesus does is he embodies this, and he makes his home among us. And that's how he does mission. He loves people. He creates relationships with them. But all the while, Jesus is calling people to a better way of living. He's revealing truth and saying, look, this is the better way. This is the third option of living. See, for us today in our modern world, the commission is the same. Jesus says, go and make disciples. But the way he does it is still the same as well as the Old Testament. When Jesus says to his disciples, if you love me, keep my commands. And so there's still this idea that we as God's people are being transformed by his witness in order to be a blessing to the rest of the world. The real question, though, that we have to answer today is, what is evangelism? What does it look like to be on mission? What is mission? What does that look like? And I wanted to steal this quote from Darrell Johnson, who says this: evangelism is joining a conversation the Holy Spirit is already having with another person. Evangelism is joining a conversation the Holy Spirit is already having with another person. I think it just does two things. One, it makes us realize that ultimately the power is in God's hands to transform people. And it's not on you to come up with some great strategy or convincing argument, but it's the Spirit who works and transforms people's hearts. And the second thing is that you have to be an active participator in that work. God is revealing himself to people around you. The Spirit is working in the hearts of your neighbors and your friends. And we have to step in and do the hard work of discernment. Where is the Lord working in this person's life? Entering in prayer, but not only prayer, but an active lifestyle, pursuing people, asking questions, and listening. I think the best illusion for this is gardening. I know we got a couple gardeners in here. Who's a gardener? There we go. Right? Gardening. So I think when we approach evangelism, it has to be like the garden in your backyard. Right? It's just careful work of bringing nutrients to the soil and being attentive of what the plant needs. If the plant starts to die, is it because there's not enough water? Is there not enough nutrients? But it's entering into this hard work, this labor of understanding what's happening in the human heart, tending to souls by the Spirit, not just in a plane flying over with pesticides, but getting on our knees and plucking weeds with our fingers. This intimate relationship with people that we're called to live by. And ultimately, I think one of the greatest ways to do this is hospitality around the table. Inviting people over and sharing a meal and asking questions like, what do you want? What does your soul ache for? What do you desire? What do you need? Because then that gives us opportunities to share the gospel. Like, this is the best way to live. This is the best way of being human that Jesus brings to us. At my family gathering, when we sit down before a meal, I say this every week, and I'm sure the people at my family gathering are a little bit sick of it, but it's so beautiful I have to say it. At this table, at our family gathering, when we sit down at this meal, there's a bunch of little kids running around. It's loud, it's crazy. We're all taking time away from work and jobs just to gather and Sabbath together in this moment and share a meal. I say this table is a representation of the gospel, where everyone is accepted not based on your social status or what you do or who you are, but because of what Jesus has done on your behalf. And so if that is the setting for evangelism, if that is the place where people are invited into, that is so beautiful. And that's ultimately what I think Jesus did, is entered into a relationship in a loving way. He told them truth. He said, look, this is sin, and step away from it. Go and sin no more, as Jesus says to a number of people. But he does it in a way where he invites them into the process. And see, we have to earn the right to speak into people's lives by unconditionally loving them, by self-sacrificially loving them, and offering a place at our table. I mean, this commission is still real today. That we would be a part of this idea, we'd be a part of the Spirit's work in opening eyes and turning them from darkness to light, getting them out of the power of Satan to God so that they could receive forgiveness. I mean, that's what Acts says in chapter 26, verse 18. If you're not a follower of Jesus today, I want to say this to you. There is a better way. There's a place of freedom. That doesn't mean life is completely easy, but there's meaning and value to come against conflict head on. And I want you to hear this. The church, me, all of us as followers of Jesus, love you the same now as we would if you followed Jesus. There's a love, there's an affection, there's a commitment on our behalf that has no strings attached. That's covenant love. And so I want to express that to you. That you have created in the image of God, and I'm called to submit. As a church, we're called to submit and love those who don't follow Jesus. I'm going to end with this quote, and we're going to sing some more songs. But I hope this quote reframes for us what it means to be on mission. This is from Craig Van Gelder. The scriptures do not only record God's mission through his people to bring salvation to the world, they are also a tool to effectively bring it about. They don't only tell us the story of God's mission, but also take an active part in accomplishing his mission. Listen, this is where I wanted to punch in. It is not the church of God that has a mission in the world, but the God of mission that has a church in the world. God is on the move, and the church is always catching up with him. We join his mission. I hope that reframes things for you. That this church doesn't have a mission that we've sat down and prayed over, but we have a God who is about mission, who is calling us out to the world to reveal the way of Jesus, healing from sin and brokenness, to find forgiveness and community, a place to belong, to be known and loved. See, God's mission is to save his people and to redeem all creation, and he's calling each one of you out to do it with him. To discern where the Spirit is moving in our neighbors and our friends, to become a tool for his mission, to become an active part in telling the story of gospel to those people around you. The church doesn't not only work for the kingdom, but it's itself a provision of the kingdom, an image of the kingdom and what it looks like to live in the way of Jesus. And as the burning image of Notre Dame is at the forefront of our minds, this question is, what will be rebuilt to take its place? What effective mission will be rebuilt to take that burning ashes to its place? How will all of us as ordinary people take part in God's mission to the world? And I want to leave this as a little bit of a teaser for next week. Next week, we're starting a new teaching series called Faithful Presence. We're going to be looking at what it looks like to proclaim the gospel. And so I kind of want to leave a little bit of mystery here, a little bit of tension to solve together as a community next week. What will be rebuilt in its place? As we look at San Diego and the movement it has away from the way of Jesus, how will communion be founded as an effective tool for God's mission in the city, on your street, in your neighborhood, and for the people of San Diego?